2. Okay, let's go. Good afternoon, everybody. Good evening, good morning, good night, depending on where you're watching this from and when you're watching it. Thank you for joining us for this week's Virtual Mentor Office Hours. Today, our guest is Jessica Hawkins Gadea. Hopefully I pronounced that vaguely correctly. Jessica is joining us from Toronto. Jessica works in legal aid, kind of. There's a very special term that she likes to use, which we're going to learn all about as we go forward. She works with Elizabeth Fry in Toronto. She's very involved in social justice. And so she's going to talk to us a little bit about trauma, involved support, and clients who need that extra little bit of tender loving care because of certain things they're going through. And they're some of the most marginalized members of our society. So Jessica, please tell us a little bit about your story. How did you make your way to the bar, and how did you end up working for Elizabeth Fry and the area of law you're working in?
Yeah. First, I'm just going to introduce Wally. He was crying very loud. He's a very loud cat, so I'm just going to hold him for a little bit so he doesn't interrupt. Okay. All right. Yeah, so first of all, thank you for inviting me. This is my first experience with GLC, actually. So I'm super excited to be here and just get to know all of you. I've seen some of the videos on YouTube, and it's really cool work that you're doing, and I'm really excited to just chat with you all. I'm pretty casual, so ask me anything. I may be able to answer, I may not. Some of you may have more experience than I do as well, right? So I'm sure a lot of you will have things to contribute as well. I'm gonna go put my cat in the bedroom.
I love Wally. Wally is already one of my favorite guests. He's making his presence known.
He is a very old man cat. All right. So, my journey into law. I guess, let me tell you what I'm doing right now. So right now I'm working for Elizabeth Fry Toronto. Elizabeth Fry there's a chapter in every city, almost every city across the country. There's also a national organization. We work with criminalized women, predominantly women who are incarcerated, going through the court system, provide services to them, advocacy for them. I'm actually not practicing right now. So for the last 6 months, I've been with eFry. I left my job at Legal Aid because I really wanted to come work for this organization. They do a lot of really great work that I'm passionate about, so I thought I would try it out. And up until 6 months ago, I was at Legal Aid Ontario. So I was working for a community legal clinic. I'm a 2017 call. So about 3 years now. Time flies pretty fast. I also articled in legal aid and had a lot of legal aid and clinic experience throughout law school, so we can chat about that as well. What's in my future? Next year, it's been deferred because of COVID. Next year, I'll be doing my LLM at Columbia, which was also part of the reason why I took the eFry job, the Elizabeth Fry job, was I really wanted to work with them, and I really wanted to work with incarcerated women, even if it wasn't practicing law. It's still really law related. I give a lot of legal information, and I run groups for women who are in prisons and women who are going through the court process. And you know, I thought it's okay if I don't practice for 6 months. I'm going to Columbia next year. I know it's all been delayed, so I'll probably stick around with eFry for the next year as well. And maybe looking into starting like a part-time side practice just to keep up with some more substantive legal work. So that's what I do. I did not know anything about law before going to law school. I knew a couple of lawyers who were retired, much older. Had no idea though what the life of a lawyer looked like, what areas of law were out there. All I really knew was that I kind of had a knack for arguing, that I kind of had a knack for standing up for people, standing up for myself. I liked to talk. I wrote the LSATs, I did well, I applied to law school, and I went to Ottawa U. I have always been drawn to nonprofit work. I've always been drawn to like writing and research, policy kind of work. working with people who aren't normally represented in our lawmaking, right? So that, I think, was part of the reason why I went to Ottawa U, because I wasn't even sure if I wanted to be a lawyer. And Ottawa U offered a lot more than just black letter law. Really big campus. The Faculty of Law there, I think, has like 300 students that they take in every year just in the English program. They also have the French program. They have a civil law program. Supreme Court's right there. Parliament's right there. There was a lot of diversity in course choice. So I got to take all of the social justice courses, all the human rights courses I wanted to take. And that's what really drew me to that program. Ottawa U, actually, I think they're one of the only ones, or back then at least, they were the only ones who allowed you to specialize in different areas. So I did my specialization in social justice law.
Fantastic. Which obviously helped you now as you've gone through various avenues. And what will be your LLM at Columbia when you do get to start?
Yeah, it's going to be human rights oriented. So I'm going to do a thesis track LLM. My focus is going to be prison law. So working, doing research on sort of the intersection of disability and race and indigeneity when it comes to incarcerated women, how to decarcerate women, how to use critical legal theory to decarcerate women and advocate for women in that position.
Wow, that is so different to what I do. That is incredible. I'm so glad there are people out there like you who are interested in the theory and then applying the theory and showing different ways to help the system and help people in that system and get out of the system long term as well, because that's such a problem that once you're into that system, it's so hard to break out of it just because there isn't the support mechanisms in place, and you end up in this eternal loop where many people who are incarcerated just can't get out of that loop, unfortunately. So it's great that you're working with these organizations and like actually bringing the theory into the real world as well eventually once you've finished your LLM as well.
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, a lot of my clients, it's not just repeat clients, like it's an intergenerational thing, right? A lot of my clients, you know, if their parents are in the same situation, their grandparents are in similar situations, and you really see how, systems work against people sometimes, and the different barriers that you may not even have been aware of, right? They kind of come up over and over. So I always like to say, like, yeah, I'm the legal expert in the room when I'm speaking with a client, but the client's usually the expert, right? Like they're the ones who have been experiencing that for their whole lives or generations. They're the ones who know how it's going to affect them on a day-to-day basis. All I can really do is just provide certain legal tools to empower them to do their own thing and kind of, make their own decisions and have some more options.
Absolutely. So so you were at Legal Aid, now you're working with Elizabeth Fry, and obviously you're no longer in a lawyer position. You're in more of it's more of an advocacy support role that you're doing instead. How's that been for you, that transition from being the lawyer to now being in this other kind of role?
Yeah. So my title is community counselor is my title. So I run a lot of like psychoeducational groups. I run a lot of like legal workshops, just legal information, that kind of thing as well. And I'm constantly referring people to lawyers because everybody that comes through Elizabeth Fry has a lot of legal issues. So another project that I started there is a drop-in legal clinic. So, if they had the funding, they could hire a full-time lawyer. There's a lot of work there. So I've connected with a lot of lawyers who wanted to volunteer their time, family lawyers, domestic violence lawyers, mental health lawyers, criminal law lawyers, civil law lawyers, business lawyers. And I'm just connecting clients who are in need with those lawyers who've offered to provide services, either like pro bono or sliding scale, that kind of thing. So we were actually going to have our first drop-in legal clinic the week that everything was shut down. So that's sort of been put on hold right now. Still able to connect people though over phone, over email. We've actually have a few of our clients being represented by some lawyers through the referral service. So I've found ways to sort of integrate my legal knowledge. And honestly, there was a little bit of a learning curve when it came to the more counseling stuff. So a big part of my role right now, for example, is facilitating groups for women who are mandated to do programs by the court. So for example, partner assault response programs, women who are charged with domestic violence usually have to do this program, right? They're mandated by the court, they're mandated by probation, they come to us, I facilitate that group. I go into Vanier, which is a jail for women in Milton, and facilitate groups there as well. So that's the bulk of my work, and then sort of some legal information stuff that I can do on the side. But coming from legal aid, the transition was pretty seamless. So in legal aid, my clients, you know, I worked in community legal services. Legal aid Ontario is a pretty big umbrella. There's a lot of things that they do. So they, you know, they're in charge of duty counsel in the courthouses, right? Family duty counsel, criminal law, duty counsel is there. There's also community legal clinics in every neighborhood across Ontario. The clinics do things like landlord and tenant, social assistance, employment, human rights, sometimes immigration. So that's the bulk of my legal practice is in that area. Clients who are being evicted, right? Clients who are coming out of domestic situations, clients who have a physical or mental health disability that prevents them from working, applying for Ontario Disability Support Program, which is a form of social assistance. Almost all of my clients, I would say over 90% of my clients were on social assistance, very low to no income, so not paying for services. That's what makes them eligible for legal aid. And when we're working with people who are constantly in crisis, constantly in survival mode, there's a big need for social work in that area as well. Where I articled, we had an in-house social worker. Where I lawyered, we did not. And it just kind of becomes part of the job, because if your client is in need, basic needs are not getting met, not eating, not sleeping, not housed, you know, having challenging family circumstances, experiencing violence, they are not going to be able to very meaningfully or effectively engage with you. So you kind of find yourself putting out all these fires first to get your client in a good spot so you can actually advocate for them, right? Actually get the ball moving for them and being able to meet with them. So coming into the counseling role, I already had a lot of I didn't have formal education. A lot of the people that I work with had formal social work education. I did not have that, but I had a lot of experience in crisis management, in dealing with clients who are having mental health episodes, and you know, navigating different levels of ability, navigating difference, you know, being empathetic, inclusive, compassionate. Those are all really important skills, right? They're not just personality traits, they're skill sets that you build when you're working with people. So that made the transition pretty seamless for me, I think. Already knew how to carry a huge workload when you know, in legal aid, you're given a lot of responsibility as a junior lawyer and as an articling student. I was running my own hearings the first month I was there. I know a lot of articling students and even junior lawyers at bigger firms don't really get to take the lead on their own files until later down the line. But lack of resources, I was thrown right in. So a lot of experience with that, yeah.
So when you were going through your articling process at Legal Aid, were you given, like, you know, we're all supposed to do CLE, CPD at some point throughout our careers, but were there those kind of opportunities available to help you develop some of those skills that have become so important for your roles?
Yeah, so every year Legal Aid Ontario has their own training conference. They usually touch on, you know, what's trauma? What does it mean to have a trauma-informed practice? You know, different resources for clients that you may have who are homeless or on disability, you know, all that kind of thing. And most of it you learn by doing, but they do sit you down and they do train you, you know, how to deal with mental health, you know, just learn about mental health, how to be an anti-oppressive, non-judgmental worker. how to take care of yourself, because when you're hearing other people's stuff, other people's trauma all the time, that gets really heavy. So how to take care of yourself as well so you can keep going. They did provide that training. Having said that, they were definitely looking for somebody who could jump right in. Most legal clinics, there's some student legal clinics that will take the time to train you, mentor you, and just kind of start you off slow, I guess. But most of the clinics don't have the resources or the time to do that. So most of the clinics are looking for students to jump right in. So when it came to my articling position, I articled in downtown Toronto at a clinic called West Toronto Community Legal Services. I had already worked in legal clinics throughout law school. I spent a year interning at a clinic. I worked at a ticket defense clinic. I did a lot of human rights research, a lot of social justice work. I did a lot of client work prior to going to law school. I worked in shelters and that kind of thing. So I sort of already had that client experience. And it was just a matter of learning the right legislation by the time I got there.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. And that's a really good tip for everyone here, that we've talked about this in other mentoring sessions, that those legal adjacent roles can be so important in providing some of those soft skills, other kinds of skills that you maybe aren't going to be taught later on, but they're going to be so applicable to the roles that you may find yourself doing at later stages in your career. So don't discount those roles that you're doing outside of law, because they can be so useful later on, as Jessica's just showing us here. She was volunteering in shelters, and that's now become something that's so essential to like the services you're now providing and the support you're now providing your clients, and because you have that experience prior to doing this. It's teaching me a lot of things right now. Hopefully you guys are making lots and lots of notes on this one. So you mentioned about mental health, and you mentioned about your clients' mental health and how also they talk at Legal Aid, in particular about how to help your mental health, maintain your mental health. What are some of the tricks that you've heard, seen, used yourself to dealing with so much trauma and so much anguish from your clients, and how do you manage to compartmentalize that in a way so that it doesn't affect you beyond the services you're providing?
Yeah, that's definitely a difficult thing to do. If you're like me and you're sort of overly empathetic, that can be very, very draining. So you do need to learn how to manage that. And has anybody heard the term vicarious trauma or compassion fatigue? So vicarious trauma is basically when you might actually experience symptoms of trauma yourself just by hearing about somebody else's experiences of trauma. So like trauma, very basic, I guess, definition, something substantial that you experience. It could be something you see, hear, that happens to you that has short-term or long-term effects, right? It affects your brain. We actually know now that when a woman experiences trauma, that's going to affect her next 3 generations. It actually can affect her genes. There's a lot of new studies on trauma now. So it really affects your coping mechanisms, how you behave, how you act, how you speak, everything about you, everything about your client, the way that they behave. So I think one thing that I found really important was learning about trauma, what that means, what that looks like, how it can be expressed differently by different people, how different people experience trauma differently, how I identify and how I've experienced difficult and challenging situations in my life, and then not just challenging situations, but distressing or traumatic situations in my own life. So I can start to identify when I am having those symptoms, those reactions, when I am overworked, when I am having maybe more mood swings than normal, when I can't sleep, when when it's starting to encroach on me. I need to be able to identify that so I can do something about it. Learning about mental health has been really crucial to my role and is really crucial to most people in my role. because when you hear other people's traumas, it's not just heavy, right? When it's every day, all the time, it can really impede on your life. So there's a lot of things we can do for that. Definitely, I'm not sure that we do a good enough job at supporting lawyers who are experiencing any sort of mental health challenges. Lawyers have some of the highest addiction rates, have some of the highest suicide ideation rates, have some of the highest depression rates, because we have demanding jobs, right? And with lawyers who work with vulnerable groups, it's a little higher. So meditation, exercise, mindfulness, eating right, sleeping right, socializing, making sure that I turn everything off when I get home. I'm not answering emails or text messages. That's all really important. Taking my vacation time. I have absolutely no issue, talking to my supervisor and just saying like, hey, I need a mental health day. Like I just had a really rough conversation with a client. It's affected me. I need to go for a walk right now, or I need the rest of the day off. And usually that's understood. Yeah.
That's great. That's great that you have a team that knows, appreciates that they're going through it as well themselves, but that they're supportive of it and supportive of you, and as a team you can all support one another, as well as your clients at the same time as well. One of the questions that I had for you was, do you have any tips for how somebody can prepare themselves for working within community services, legal aid, with vulnerable and at-risk groups? Do you have any tips, any thoughts? Lots of people on this call are kind of new to the program, so.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of stuff that I can share. If you're interested in working in legal aid or in nonprofit or anything social justice-y, earlier somebody was mentioning they were interested in family law and doing that kind of work, reach out to me. I suck at social media. I don't go on LinkedIn as much as I should, but you should be able to find me. I'm always happy to chat, always happy to talk one-on-one as well. But yeah, preparing yourself to working in community services, I think just experience. Like take all the clinic courses, take that extra time, go volunteer at a legal aid clinic, just do that work, reach out to people. Like any other area of law, like networking is really important as well. But I find what's more important is just grasping that getting substantive opportunities to work with people. Courses you take are really important as well. I know you don't have as many like social justice lawyers on here, but I really just fled from all the black letter law stuff. I kind of did my requirements to get through law school, and then the rest of my courses were, women's advocacy, Indigenous women's advocacy, defending women on trial, that kind of thing, family law, client consultations, interviewing, all those other pieces were really, really important for me to figure out what I wanted to be working, who I wanted to work with, who I wanted my clients to be, what I was interested in. So I think my first step is just like, don't just seclude yourself to what you think you should be taking to be hired. Like follow what you're interested in, follow your passions. When you're interviewing with employers, it really shows what you're genuinely passionate about. They're looking for that. I think that's one that's really, really important. Interviewing skills, very important in legal aid. I think most of the questions I would get in legal aid interviews when I was applying for positions would be like role-playing scenarios. How would you interview a client with these issues? What would you do if a client came in and started having this crisis? That kind of thing. So I didn't do any traditional moots, but I did do, it was called a Canadian Client Consultation Competition in 2017, and I did really well in that. So that was there's a lot of different opportunities that are out there that people don't always know about. They're not necessarily the more traditional route to go when it comes to legal practice. Volunteering, I made it a point. I think I prioritized volunteering more than I did like studying almost. I think I made sure to do really well in my courses, but I definitely prioritize experience. And I think when it comes to legal aid, that's just as important, if not more important. Anybody can, learn the law, right? But not everybody can engage with people, has good interview skills, has that sort of empathy and that compassion to work with legal aid clients, right? I think that's really important. And another tip, if you're looking into getting into legal aid, have something that you care about. Like have a good answer to the question why you want to work in that area. Legal aid doesn't tend to want to hire people who are just looking for any job, right? They want to hire people who are going to stay there, right? Who are going to do what they need to do to take care of themselves, to kind of overcome that compassion fatigue. Somebody who is going to care about the clients, somebody's going to go above and beyond for the clients, because we don't have a lot of resources. We don't have, people at the front desk. We don't have admin people. We don't have clerks. We don't have people to do that kind of work for us. So we have to do like sort of everything ourselves, from opening the file to closing a lot of the time. So it's really heavy work, right? You got to be genuinely into it, I think. Yeah.
Are there any books that you read that really for you were the standout, kind of like, this is kind of like my guide, or was my starting point, something that somebody could read now? I mean, they can't, a lot of the people on this video won't actually, they're not at a Canadian university, so they can't take a lot of the fun courses, interesting courses that you were just mentioning, because they're just not available to them. But maybe there's a book, or maybe there's a podcast you listen to, or something that would be really helpful for them to kind of help them broaden their experience and their knowledge, and figure out if this is an area they're really interested in, and have a real passion for.
Yeah. I don't know if I can think of anything off the top of my head. I can send you some articles on community lawyering afterwards, though, and maybe you could put those up somewhere. I don't know.
We can share those. That would be great. Yeah, anything that you think might be. So there you go. Type in community lawyering. That might be a good start, everyone. Google
community lawyering. It's a whole field. Trauma-informed lawyering, whole area as well. A podcast that I'm listening to right now that has been pretty inspiring in terms of like my application to Columbia and the work that I want to do in prison law is a podcast called Appointed. It's a student at the University of Ottawa who runs that podcast with Senator Kim Pate. So Kim Pate used to teach at the University of Ottawa. She used to teach prison law, and now she's off being a senator. She was one of my profs, and she does a really good job at outlining current issues, right? Basic income, incarceration of racialized women, of Indigenous women, a lot of different issues. Every week you tackle a different issue. So it's a good learning, a good outlook to learn about advocacy.
Oh, fantastic. Great tips. Okay, I'll put those in the comments, but we'll get some more from Jessica as well, some like standout ones that stick with her. Finally, this is my final question. So guys, if you have any questions for Jessica, please start putting them in the chat box. But if there's one thing that you wish you'd known earlier in your career, what would that be that you can share with everybody else? Or one thing you wish you'd done earlier in your career?
Yeah. I think I need to think about this one. I mean, you probably hear this one a lot. One thing that like really comes to mind is like reaching out and networking with a diverse group of people, right? Not just lawyers. I think, and I've seen some other people on here as well, like come to these meetings and say, I wasn't sure if I wanted to be a lawyer when I went to law school, or some people are even still not sure if this is like my forever path. Talk to as many people as you can. There are a lot of law-related jobs that do not include lawyering. My law degree has been one of the most useful tools. I'm pretty sure I'm going to go back to law. I'm not going to stay at EFRI forever. I'm going to go back to lawyering. But I went to law school, I think, because I really wanted that tool. I wanted to know how our systems functioned. I wanted to know how law was made and changed and adapted to our society. And I wanted to be able to feel like I knew what I was talking about when I was advocating for people, right? I wanted to know all the different avenues, all of the different options. And like I said, I didn't even know that social justice law was a thing when I first went to law school. I didn't know that property law was a thing or any of these other areas. I had no idea. I was clueless. So what really helped me, and what I think I could have done more of, is just taking that all in, talking to people, talking to junior lawyers, talking to 10-year calls, 20-year calls, and seeing how they got to where they are. Find somebody who's doing something that really inspires you and ask them how they got there. Having those conversations, talking to your profs, going to office hours, all of that stuff I definitely could have done a little bit more of. Yeah, and when it comes to legal aid as well, something that I'm learning as well. I think it's hard to get out of legal aid. If you're going to transition, you probably want to do that earlier in your career, just because it's a very unique area to practice in. Like social justice, property law is a very unique area to practice in. So for example, I've only worked at the social justice tribunals of Ontario, so that is mostly administrative work, administrative tribunals, landlord and tenant board, human rights tribunal, that kind of thing. So it's very limiting, very different rules as well. Does not follow traditional civil procedure rules. They all have their own rules. They all have their own sort of customs and cultures at each tribunal. And now when I'm starting to look at, okay, what's next? I'm starting to lean more into like prison law, criminal law. I'm finding, okay, I have to learn a whole new way of doing things, right? I have to learn a whole new area. And I guess this isn't really to answer your question, but in legal aid, when you're working in administrative tribunals, things are very fast paced. You don't normally carry, unless it's like the Human Rights Tribunal, you don't normally carry a file for 1-2 years. Landlord and tenant board stuff goes very quickly. You might carry a file at most for a few months, maybe. There's really quick overturn. You're in there a lot. It's kind of like quick and dirty law. You're on your feet at the LTB quite a bit. And there's also a lot of wiggle room there as well. Rules aren't as strict. I think a lot of the time adjudicators just don't have the time to abide by all the rules. There's a room full of self-represented people. There might be a few legal aid lawyers there. So you have kind of a lot of room to just kind of go down to the basics and just use your own reason sometimes, your own negotiation skills, your own mediation skills, trying to get things done, in the hallways between landlords and tenants, because nobody wants to wait at the board all day to be heard. It's a really bustling area, especially in Toronto, dealing with a lot of evictions, a lot of LTB stuff as well, very easily negotiated outside of the landlord and tenant board. Also areas of law where there's a lot of people without legal knowledge trying to represent themselves, right? I'm not normally dealing with a lawyer on the other end. I'm usually dealing with a landlord or a government representative who's not a lawyer. So very different skill sets to pull from. And, when I'm talking about like people skills, super important. Super, super important.
That's fantastic. I can't even imagine like the amount of knowledge that you have from different practice areas that you've absorbed in a relatively short period of time, for your legal career so far. But that's, so if you're interested in learning lots and lots of different practice areas, legal aid might just be the practice area for you, because it seems to cover an awful lot of different areas all at the same time. So that's fantastic.
Yeah, legal aid is also a really good place if you just if you want to jump in, right? If you want to have, like, you will be given a lot of responsibility really early on. I think, yeah, my first month I was already running 2 hearings. Had no idea what I was doing, but I figured it out. I was probably carrying about 30 files at a time that were just mine. I would get things, the supervising lawyer to check off on things, but I really carried it all from the first phone call to the client, first interview with the client, collecting all the evidence, all the submissions, all the way to the very end. So you get a lot of experience, like a lot of really heavy experience in different areas of law. So it's a really exciting place to be, especially as a student and especially as an articling student. In legal aid, different clinics run differently. Some clinics will have the lawyers doing all of the areas of law all of the time, sort of whoever's available will take that file. Some clinics have a housing lawyer, a social assistance lawyer, an employment lawyer. So it really depends on where you're practicing as well. And really different if you're in a city versus in a rural area as well. So I articled downtown Toronto. Like I said, we had an in-house social worker, so that was a really good resource that we used a lot when clients were having issues. In Oakville is where I did. At Halton Community Legal Services is where I lawyered for a year. And, they did not have that, but they also had like a smaller population, right? Not as many clients. I had a little bit more time to be more, to put more research, more work, more love and care into every single one of my files, versus in Toronto, it was just go, go, go every day. Every day there was maybe 20 people walking into the office who needed legal services. You're not always fully representing clients in legal aid. You're sort of assessing eligibility, first of all, because there's rules around who's eligible. They have to meet a certain financial cutoff. And then you kind of have to judge like what you have time to do in the next month. Who are you going to represent? Who are you just going to give information to or advice to? Who are you going to write submissions for, but then maybe send them on their own to represent themselves? There's a lot of different kind of work that you do. Sometimes you're just answering questions on the phone, and that's sort of all you do for that person. It really depends on the client's level of sophistication, their ability to advocate for themselves, their ability to read, write, and sort of understand the legal concepts going on, their mental health, their physical health, all this stuff sort of comes into play when you're in legal aid. I think one of the biggest things I have come to realize is that with legal aid clients, they're coming to you at a time of crisis, right? They're about to be evicted from their homes. Their family might have nowhere to go. They might be, abused by a partner at home and they're looking for help. They may have just lost their jobs. They might be discriminated against at work. There's a lot of really, they're going through something very difficult when they come to you. So it's really important to learn how to de-escalate those sort of heated and emotional conversations. And it is really important to introduce trauma-informed practice into your everyday. And I mean, we could have like a whole other session on what trauma-informed practice means. But at its core, it's realizing that the client's experiences are really at the forefront. It's not usually the legal issue that's at the forefront. That's definitely an afterthought for the client. And it's usually an afterthought for the lawyer as well, because at first you're dealing with a real human being in front of you who's in a really difficult place. You might be offering them water, coffee, tea. When somebody has experienced a lot of trauma or more complex trauma throughout their lives, there's a lot of new research that shows how that impedes memory, right? Their ability to answer questions, to be interviewed, to testify, to provide any sort of statement. So you find it might take you, 3, 4, 5 interviews, whereas it would have just taken you one interview with somebody else, right? To get all of the important stuff out. Things often come out in a very cyclical way. You don't usually get a timeline of events in chronological order. Memory can be really foggy and that kind of thing. And it takes a lot of patience, right? It takes a lot of patience you have to adjust your practice depending on your client, right? I have one client, for example, I used to have who, it might be really small things, like she always had to be sitting in a certain spot in my office. If not, she could see this painting that like really triggered her. And if she saw that painting, she would break down. I wouldn't be able to ask her all the questions I needed to. She wouldn't be able to tell me the information. She'd have to leave. We'd have to reschedule. I'd have to like sit with her in a different office. I had another client who had a severe bed bug problem, bed bug and cockroach problem in the city of Toronto. We actually had to fumigate the office twice after he left the office because stuff would be falling out of his jacket and things like that. So, okay, I have to meet with him outside of the office, right? Go to a coffee shop, that sort of thing. Make sure he's got, he was also new to the country. Make sure he knows like where to go buy cleaning supplies, that this is not okay, how to talk to his landlord about it. How to like put your clothes in the dryer to kill the bed bugs, like all these sort of things sort of became part of the advocacy work that I did for him. Another client who had a lot of behavioral difficulties. He would get really loud and aggressive, and if he didn't understand what was going on, he might start yelling in the office. He might start yelling at you. He wasn't harmful, right? We have to learn how to de-escalate those situations. That becomes part of your practice. That becomes part of your interviewing skills. Clients who might have addiction issues. One client, for example, I learned, okay, I have to call him in the morning, right? If I call him in the afternoon, he comes in the afternoon, and we're not going to be able to have a coherent conversation. I have to get him in here at like 8:30, right? So a lot of adjustments that you make to your practice. And a lot of these things as well also come into your submissions when you're advocating for somebody. Their story, it's their story to tell. It's their trauma, right? A lot of these stories sort of come to the forefront when it comes to how you advocate for them. And it's a lot of storytelling and applying the law to their stories. Trying to think of an example. I was representing this one woman who had, she owed her landlord a lot of money, like over a year's worth of rent she owed her landlord. And the landlord was kind of letting it slide because she had lost her baby. She had experienced a lot of really severe trauma and abuse at the hands of her partner. Preventing her from, like, she lost her job, right? She couldn't get a new job. She was struggling. She was in and out of the hospital. Couldn't pay her rent, ended up owing thousands and thousands of dollars. And she was really ashamed of what was going on at home. So she didn't tell her landlord what was going on. So all of this stuff became really relevant when I'm in front of an adjudicator, right? We have to talk about it all. We have to explain it all. And we have to do it in a way that's going to be respectful to her and sensitive to her and her story, right? So all this stuff sort of comes to the forefront. So we're really different from working in private practice or working at a law firm. A lot of crossover with criminal law.
Yeah, just mind blown right now. My brain is just trying to process all of that, let alone try and practice in all of that, because it's a very different experience to my practice, because I'm a corporate lawyer, so it's extremely different. You know what, I'm going to throw this open to anyone. Does anybody have a question for Jessica? It can be absolutely anything. It can be something she's talked about, something she's not talked about, and it's like burning in the back of your brain. Does anyone have one? If you don't, it's perfectly okay. I have a question in the back of my brain, but if anyone has one. Okay, I'm going to ask my question. Have you noticed a difference? Like, we hear a lot at the moment about legal aid budgets being cut. And then, you know, with COVID right now, there's a lot of people who are suffering, a lot of people who are struggling. So potentially, you know, reaching out to legal aid and Elizabeth Fry and other organizations such as those. Have you seen in your, you know, years of experience so far that that budget has had an impact on the services you can provide and the number of people you can help? And has it changed the way you're able to support people?
There was the big budget cuts last year. That was kind of my first experience where I noticed an obvious difference. And so last year, 2019, Ontario cut 30% of legal aid's funding, said, you know, not allowed to practice immigration law at all, drastically cut what was available, what duty counsel could do, what sort of legal aid tickets they gave out. There were some job losses due to that. Not as much of an impact on the clinic system. I think more of an impact at the courthouses. But what you see with these sort of funding cuts, you kind of just see the pressure being put elsewhere, right? When people are being evicted more easily or can't access a lawyer through legal aid, you know, can't access their social assistance. You know, at the same time of legal aid cuts, there was also social assistance cuts in Ontario. You start seeing that pressure instead put on like the healthcare system, the criminal justice system, that kind of thing. Where I was at, I was really lucky. In Halton, our team there was really great. Our ED was always looking for grants elsewhere. We always had funding from other kinds of projects that we were doing. So we were able to, from what I saw, maintain similar numbers. A lot of other clinics have not. A lot of other clinics like Parkdale, downtown Toronto, really, really suffering. Wasn't even able to make their rent downtown at one point. So yeah, there has been a lot of really deep-seated effects. Now with COVID, legal aid has actually expanded their services during COVID. And I mean, the budget must be running low by now, especially with the cuts. So I'm not sure where they're at, but they've actually been expanding their budget. So they're now giving 2 hours free legal advice to people who are experiencing domestic violence. The reason for that is that domestic violence in the city of Toronto has tripled since COVID started. That's because people are home alone with their abusers, right? There's more incidents, a lot of stress, right? People losing their jobs. There's a lot more domestic violence. At EFRI, I work a lot with women who are experiencing domestic violence, doing safety planning with them, informing them on how to get a restraining order, a peace bond, that kind of thing as well. I actually haven't seen that much of a rise with that, but I've seen a lot more fear and anxiety within my clients who are already in that situation. What else has legal aid done? Legal aid has sort of restored duty counsel's ability to represent in bail hearings. They've increased the funding for that again, and that's been imperative to keep COVID out of our jails. So it has made its way into our jails, unfortunately, but a lot of people in Ontario have been released over the last few months. I was actually pretty amazed at how well Ontario did on releasing people from provincial jails. And a big part of that was like volunteers at the courthouse and duty counsel working extremely hard. So a big difference from last year where the government was saying, okay, we're not doing bail hearings at all. So I think it's really showing the importance of legal aid during the pandemic.
Yeah, definitely, especially for the people who are most at risk and vulnerable. So it's great to hear, though, that they somehow are finding some extra budget from somewhere, even if we don't know how long it's going to last for, but at least it's there at the moment to help people through this. We have a question, if you're okay with that. Jawad, do you want to ask your question?
Sure. So thank you. This has been very informative for somebody who's come in new to the country. You know, this actually exposes me to a whole different vista of legal reality. So thank you for that. While I was practicing in Bangladesh, you know, I was always in private practice, but I believe some of the most fulfilling and fond memories that I've had um, was when I look back, you know, was not the time when I won a big case or when I got a lot of fees. It was as a result of seeing the happiness that I brought in people's faces, you know, who actually needed it the most. And you know, this can be a very fulfilling practice for any lawyer. The question that I wanted to ask has to do with my work as a team leader and an outreach agent for this organization called National Canadian Lawyers Initiative, which was an initiative that was born as a response to the pandemic. We basically try to help people who would otherwise not qualify for legal aid, but are nonetheless in a disadvantaged position. Um, so one of my functions is to essentially pair up lawyers and introduce them to the organization so that they can take up files and help particular individuals who have come to us for help. But one of the issues that I've faced is that, you know, many of these lawyers end up not being able to help because their insurance does not cover it. Now, my question is that I'm not very familiar with this um, sort of the interplay between the lawyer's profession and their relationship with insurers. And I know that they have to have insurance for anything that they do. But is how difficult is it for a private practitioner to get involved in sort of occasional legal aid work, you know, while at the same time keeping themselves covered and while at the same time ensuring that they're compliant with their practice, their insurers? That's my question.
So legal aid in Ontario and in most provinces are very distinct areas of law. So a lot of private practice lawyers are probably not qualified to practice in those areas. You know, like legal aid is just housing, criminal, family, like some employment, right? So you could probably do some employment, social assistance, mental health related things. And lawyers who are in private practice, like criminal defense lawyers, you know, lawyers who have their own practices and are doing housing law, are already doing that kind of work. Where we see a lot of private practice lawyers wanting to volunteer is doing like pro bono work. So there's places like Pro Bono Students Canada, Pro Bono Ontario. I'm sure there's an organization in Alberta as well. I'm not sure what they're all called. So I don't know how it works with insurance, like legal aid lawyers. So when I worked for legal aid, they covered all of that. I was insured through them. So I didn't really have to worry about that. I've never had to go out and get insurance on my own, so I'm not exactly sure how that works. But there are a lot of organizations that lawyers volunteer through to do pro bono work in their own areas. So I would maybe reach out to some of those organizations and maybe ask them how they handle that. Eric, I don't know if that's something you could answer, but that's the best I can do right now.
So either the organization that I'm going to be working for will be arranging the insurance, or I'll have to arrange the insurance myself. Is it like that, or can I, like, the reason why I'm asking this question is I want to know how free a lawyer should feel who's in private practice. How much freedom should he or she feel to just jump in and provide a legal aid service, you know, as a one-off, or even on a sort of, intermittently.
Yeah, so to provide legal aid services, you have to be eligible, like as a lawyer, you have to be qualified and eligible and meet certain criteria to be on the legal aid rosters. So in Ontario, like legal aid will give the client a ticket that they can then take to a private practice lawyer. And you'll be on a legal aid list, right? So they have certain requirements if you want to be on the criminal law roster or the family law roster. So that's all available on their website. When it comes to pro bono work, though, if you're working for a firm, I'm pretty sure that like that coverage would be through like whatever insurance you've got at that firm. You'd have to discuss it with them, like what sort of pro bono work you're allowed to do, and what you're not allowed to do, I would assume.
I think that's the case as well. I think it's about talking to the firm that you're working with, and ensuring that your personal liability through your insurance policy will cover you for pro bono work. I believe there's an additional premium that you have to pay. Don't know how much it is. It probably depends on your practice area, how many hours you're going to be doing, and the type of work type of advice you'll be giving on that one. But it's definitely something you can talk to the insurer about. So I mean, if you were setting up your own practice, for example, Joanne, you could talk to Law Pro in Ontario, and Law Pro would probably be able to give you some advice on that. And they did talk with us like a month or so ago, I believe. So our GLC Ontario chapter will have contacts at Law Pro who can probably give you some more advice on that one.
Right, and from NCLI's point of view, like if I were to tackle this question from NCLI's point of view, would they have to then arrange for the insurance themselves?
That's a tricky one that I don't think Jessica can give an answer to on that one. I think it comes down to every organization, but I would assume at the moment for NCLI that they're relying on all their volunteers for all of them to have the insurance policy and to cover them individually for the volunteers. But it's probably something that NCLI will be looking to work with Law Pro to figure out how to ensure that everybody has sufficient coverage on that one, I would assume. Sound good? Eric, did you have a question for Jessica? No?
I was just going to chime in that, yeah, in Alberta, it's pro bono Alberta. And my feeling is from my work with accountants who are, in many ways, are structured similarly to lawyers in terms of insurance and so on, is that more often than not, it's your employer that would have the insurance. And if you're volunteering for an organization like Pro Bono Alberta or whatever, then more than likely they would have insurance to cover the letter work for them. So yeah, again, I think as the advice you got, check with Law Pro and see what they say. Yeah.
So maybe something I can add, like when I was recruiting lawyers who wanted to come in and do the drop-in legal clinic, they all came with their own. They all came with their own insurance. Like that wasn't something that I was part of the process for. There might be some organization. I doubt if it's going to be like nonprofit or volunteer work that it would come from the organization they're volunteering through. It would usually come from the practitioner themselves.
Wonderful. All right, well, I've run out of questions, Jessica, although my brain is now firing with lots of things that I need to go and read up on for myself. And I'll definitely take you up on that offer of some articles that you think might be relevant for all of us. And I will be in touch. I will send you an email for that, and then I will share them on our Facebook group and our Facebook page. I think that's the easiest way for us to disseminate that information. And if they're on the line, then I will put the web link into the comments section or the about section of this video when we put it on YouTube for you, so people can look at those afterwards as well. But Jessica, thank you so much. Like, this has been really, really informative. I have learned an awful lot about an area that I am sorry to say that I am completely unknowledgeable about, and it's such a crucial area for so many of our society around us. So thank you for sharing that knowledge with us and teaching us lots of information. And I wish you well with your LLM. And I hope you come back and tell us all about how your LLM goes and how you've been able to put all of that experience into your future practice as well.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, thank you for having me here. I know it's exciting, especially right now with everything going on in the world. I think a lot of people are using this time at home to kind of go and learn about things they wouldn't normally learn about. Also, I'm just going to put it out there. If anybody is interested in applying for an LLM, I would be happy to chat about the application process, share some of my material as well. I applied, I'm going to Columbia, but I applied across the States and also across Canada. So I can talk about those two different processes.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
There we go. What a great resource Jessica has turned into today. We thought we were just going to learn about legal aid and trauma-informed practice, and now we're getting, LLM advice as well as other things. So Jessica, thank you again for joining us. We really appreciate it. We will post this video on YouTube. If you have any comments, if you have any feedback, please do let us know. There will be no session for the next 2 weeks because it is the NCA exam period, so we're going to take a 2-week break. It's also August, so for any of you who are relatively new to Canada, the world disappears in August. We all go on holiday. I'm currently in Banff, so I'm also on holiday right now. So for everyone who is sitting their exams for the next 2 weeks, all of our fingers and toes are crossed for you. You are all going to do absolutely fantastically. And we can't wait to hear about your experiences when we get back. But please do join us in 2 weeks' time. We're going to be joined by volunteers from another organization who helps self-represented litigants in BC, Amici Curie. So they're friends of the court. They are going to be joining us. They are all internationally trained lawyers themselves as well. So they're going to be sharing their experiences of volunteering and how it's helping shape their practices going forward in their legal experience. So it'll be a really nice segue from Jessica's experience today to hear about how we're doing it on the other side of Canada on that one. So everybody have a lovely evening. We will talk to you all soon. Jessica, thank you once again.
Yeah, it was nice meeting you all.